no mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. I'm excited about exercising my chairing muscles this year with the annual plan process and with the long plan amendments. And as I said, this session is being live streamed. Much of the material we have, covered in previous conversations, but it's really good to have that kind of update before we go to the committee meeting next week. Sorry, on the 8th, is it next week? I'm still on holiday time. So anyway, I would like to, we're going to have different sections presented by officers, and we'll probably take questions at the end of each session. So just kind of raise your hand or message me. And so I think I'm handing over to Barbara in the first instance.
Kia ora koutou. I think we've got a presentation that someone is about to share on the screen. Thanks, Jeffrey. The first committee workshop of the year. So I just want to give you all a bit of an introductory context, much of which you will be aware of, so I don't want to dwell on those matters that you are briefed on. But very quickly, for the sake of anyone who is watching this live stream, we, with this annual plan, are implementing year 2 of the long-term plan that the council approved a year ago. And this continues to focus on the 6 key priority areas of the long-term plan and our significantly increased capital program, which of course we are implementing at a time when there is a lot of risk and uncertainty globally and nationally. And we have talked over the last few months about a disrupted supplier market, the increasing inflationary pressures we need to deal with, and also a saturated labour market. But now we have Omicron adding further uncertainty to this period of time. So we'll need to be conscious of that and ready to adjust as we go forward in this planning process. So on the material you're going to see today, you'll see we talk about a projected rates rise that is slightly lower than the 9.7% we forecast for year 2 of the long-term plan, being 9.1%. And that results from a mixture of the additional cost pressures we have being offset by internal savings and also the operating impacts of the changes you've made to the capital program. And I think it's worth just pausing to say the internal savings we have been making cumulatively for the council are significant. This particular budget already builds in a $15 million cost saving target for the organisation, but that adds to the savings being achieved this year and already achieved last year. When you bring those savings together, we have worked very hard to bring you $32 million worth of savings across a 3-year period, which is a significant reduction in rates requirement. And I think that's worth being aware of as we have this conversation. The other point to note is that the plan rates for 22-23 aren't all about growing operational costs, because we're still being impacted by some of the more recent extraordinary events, the impacts of debt funding from the 2016 earthquake and also the 2020 COVID lockdown. So today, as you've said, Chair, we're going to talk through some more detail on the draft plan, and I think I'll just hand over to the team to go through that detail rather than make any more comment. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And I guess there may not be any questions at this point. I just want to highlight what we're going to move through in this session. Next, Jeffrey will talk about the timeline and the process. Then Sarah will be leading the conversation around the financials, so we'll get into more detail. Baz will talk us through the resolution and amendment process. We're going to have more of a conversation on residual waste disposal with Siobhan, and then finish up with consultation and next steps. So, so then I think that we'll go straight to Jeffrey.
Thank you, Councillor. So yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about the timeline and the process before we get into the financials. So just before talking about the timeline, I just want to briefly touch on the key drivers of the process. So As you know, there's LTP amendments that we're looking to progress alongside our annual plan for the coming year. And so the LTP amendments have specific statutory requirements in terms of the audit and consultation process that goes around them. And so basically, this just means that there's a slightly compressed timeline with a little less wiggle room than we may ordinarily have for an annual plan process. And so while the annual plan updates are largely separate from the decision making you'll be taking around the potential amendments, they're all being run through a single budget process. And so the timelines do need to align. And so that's sort of drives some of the timelines that we're looking at. And so you've got a high level timeline here, lots of boxes and arrows, which was always fun. And where we are at the moment, we're currently in the middle there. So we've had some an early workshop back in December before the break to give an early view as we can. Today's talking about the base budget and an overview of where things are at. But the main decision point for consultation, what goes into consultation, will be in around about a month's time on the 8th of March, when you'll receive a full draft consultation document covering, focused on the LTP amendments, but also covering annual plan as required, and a draft budget for your deliberations. And you'll see an audit coming right off the back of that deliberations and into consultation through April. So the process we're running this year has including separate sessions on the key issues. So we've got the capital rescheduling, the LTP amendment, city housing options, and there's also a separate report coming to the committee meeting next week around residual waste options. And so we've got some dedicated sessions on those key choices there. And it also includes some of the earlier sessions we've had in December and today and also next week. And that's partly to ensure that the deliberations in March can pass smoothly into an external audit process. But I think also more importantly, it's to try to improve your experience of deliberations. We're trying to give you some earlier points of engagement with the budget than what you might have had in previous rounds, to give you an opportunity to raise concerns or any changes you might like to see. And we're trying to get to a place where we can avoid last minute changes in those final deliberations, so they can be well considered, robust, and you guys can feel comfortable in the decisions that you're making. So that's really what's driving some of the timeline that we put together there. So the final slide I'll touch on, which isn't really process, but this is the same view that was shown to the workshop for this committee on the 14th of December, just before the break. And it shows the current plan program of work included for 22-23. And so this is from the decisions that you made in the long-term plan last year and adopting the long-term plan, and also reflects the capital rescheduling done in the Finance and Performance Committee in November. And so it's really just provided here to give you a sense of what, in addition to the continued delivery of services, is planned for the annual plan as it stands. And so this is all built into the financial figures that you'll see that Sarah will talk to shortly. There's an A3 that will support this, that gives a little bit more description of each of these items. If you came to the workshop in December, you will have seen that, and I can share that with you, and it will be in the papers that go out for the meeting next week. I don't intend to talk through all of these individually. They're there to just give you a sense of the body of work planned in the coming year. There's a few in there that you'll note are repeated in some places, so public spaces, bike network, those sorts of things, and that just reflects that some of the projects within those programs will be being delivered in the year, while others will continue on. So I'll leave it there, unless you have questions around the process timeline or that slide there. I'll pass it on to Sarah to talk to you about the financials and where the draft budget's looking like.
Thanks, Jeffrey. If I'm coming up as Kevin Black, it's because I'm sitting with Kevin Black, but it is me. Nice to see everyone. Hey, as Barbara mentioned in her intro to this briefing, the annual plan is based on year 2 of the long-term plan that you adopted last year. There was a projected 9.7% rates increase for year 2. We were looking at a debt to revenue ratio of about 235%. But the current draft budget for next year has a 9.1% rates increase before growth. We've got a $420 million capital program debt to revenues hovering around the same, about 234%, and we should have a closing debt amount of $1.3 billion. I'm going to step through the following slides that will show you the key changes that have led to the updated financial position. But it's important to note that within the LTP, there were some key drivers in that existing rates increase. Things that we're dealing with include inflation, interest costs, depreciation based on the capital program that we're delivering, debt repayments, especially some of the more recent shocks from COVID and library closures. Year 2 of the LTP included a $1 million uplift in spending on Māori outcomes and representation. And we have some additional costs in there we had some in the LTP for things like the district plan. So those were all in the long-term plan that you resolved. And so the next slides just focus on what are the pressures and what's moved since then. So next slide, Jeffrey. And again, as Councillor Matthews said, we'll take questions at the end. So I'll try and skip through this reasonably quickly to allow plenty of time for those questions and that engagement. So cost pressures, you've seen this before at the end of last year, but there's just a little bit more detail and transparency here for you. As you know, and we've spoken about it regularly, there are real issues in supply chains and labour markets that are creating cost pressures. We're feeling it in all the tenders that we're doing it. We're seeing it in the price increases. And that's about, and it's not just in third-party suppliers, it's also in our remuneration costs. We've obviously got the ongoing impact of COVID-19 and the support we're wanting to provide, as well as the additional support that was required for the end of, during this year, the COVID impacts we've felt this year. We want to flag with you that we know that there will be an impact from Omicron, but we haven't quantified that yet. All we know is if we try and forecast it now, it will be wrong. So we just want to flag that those risks that exist and they are not baked in yet into the existing budget. Interest costs, as I briefly mentioned, which were already built into year 2 of the LTP, are greater than what was forecasted in the LTP and those significant forecasting assumptions. We're all feeling that, both in our private lives and our professional lives, the cost of interest rates going up. There is some additional pressure for detailed seismic assessments of some of our properties. And we know that there's inflationary pressure on a number of our projects, but specifically community centre upgrades. And that was something that was actually carried forward from previous years before the LTP. So next slide, Jeffrey. Talk a little bit in more detail around what the impact of COVID is. As I said, there is heightened risks not only to our operations but the delivery of our work program. We know that it's probable that there will be market disruption, not just to the way that we deliver our services, but also to some of our assumed revenues and events and services that we provide, reduced patronage. So there's a performance risk here and a financial risk. This might impact us through this current fiscal year, so we could see an impact on our costs and revenue this year, but also it might flow into next financial year. We will manage that risk through our normal financial performance monitoring processes, and if we need to adjust budgets or respond, that'll come through quarterly reporting or as needed. Next slide, Jeffrey. So here we talk about some of the rates pressures. Now, these are largely due to a reduction in forecast revenue based on what we had budgeted in the LTP, but it has a direct impact on rates. So I've got Kevin here with me. Kevin, do you want to talk through the slide or do you just want to answer questions at the end?
Probably just answer questions at the end.
Yeah.
We've had this up before. So.
We have had this this detail up before, so I'm not going to go into every line, but you'll see there's a number of things driving a reduced revenue that we will budget for next year based on against what we had budgeted for in the year 2 of the LTP. In addition to the parking impacts, there's also reduced NZTA subsidy, Waka Kotahi subsidy on some of our capital projects in the cycleways program. That isn't necessarily a rates pressure, but there are some flow-on impacts on interest costs because we'll have to increase debt to deliver those projects, fully debt funding them ourselves. And there's operational cost impacts because of Waka Kotahi not providing a subsidy for an assumption that we made for cable car strengthening as well. Next page, Jeffrey. So those were the pressures, but you'll see that we're forecasting a 9.1% rates increase next year versus a 9.7% that was in the LTP. So what were those positive changes? They are largely impacts of the rescheduling of the capital program. You may remember that we had a large year one originally in the LTP, and we've rescheduled that so those programs and projects will be delivered in out years, and that has a positive impact on the depreciation that we'll collect next year, and that equates to about $9.5 million. That little note there does mean that even though we're not collecting that depreciation next year, once the projects are delivered and we capitalise those projects, we will start collecting that depreciation. It will just be in a different year of our current LTP. We have an existing savings target of $17.5 million in the LTP. Now we're going to be using that target to offset some of those cost pressures that were already present. And I suppose the key message here is that any additional cost pressures that we see coming through will be very difficult to be delivered via internal cost savings and efficiencies. We're doing a really great job, and we've done a great job, but the barrel's kind of empty in some of these opportunities, and it would be difficult to offset anything you want to do other than through rates increases. Next page, Jeffrey. A little bit here about revenue and financing. We do, during an annual plan process, have a look at the revenue and financing policies and our fees and user charges. This annual plan, because year 2 of the LTP, you're not going to see the detailed overview of every single one of our policies. What we'll bring to you are any of the changes to look at a macro level. And there's nothing significant that we'll be doing in this space. There are some temporary variances relating to funding of the cable car and some known inconsistency in the city housing space. Those are going to be well covered through the LTP amendment process. There's a few fees where we're looking at increasing compared to what we had budgeted for in the long-term plan. They're in the draft budget, but most of them are effectively proposed to offset inflationary pressures. None of them are material, but we'll get into that detail in the 8th of February and in March. Next slide, Jeffrey. Over to you, back over to you.
So I see we have some questions, or we have a question at least, from Councillor Condi. I wonder if we might go to that now.
It's probably a good time to pause. Yeah.
Yeah, off you go. Off you go, Councillor.
Yay, thank you. These are mostly going to be for Kevin because it's really around trying to understand what's going on with the parking revenue slide. I guess my first question is to understand, like, how much can we untangle the impacts of COVID from some of the changes that we've made? So I'm thinking particularly, you know, there's that budget line there, the waterfront parking change from all-day parking to P240, which has seen a reduction of revenue. Do we know that that's because of the change that we've made, or is that because of COVID, or do we not know?
I think it's probably a bit of a mix. So certainly the idea of moving that area of the city from all-day parking to P240 was to provide some capacity as parks start to get removed from the central city. But of course, in the meantime, pretty much in line with when that went live, we also found ourselves in lockdowns. last year, and we still have a situation where there still seems to be significant numbers of people working from home, so there isn't the same demand for that parking area at the moment. So it's a little bit hard to tell about whether the issue is that we've changed it to P240 and that was a mistake, or whether we changed it to P240 but we've been impacted by the issues that have happened in Wellington and across the rest of the country as a result of COVID.
Thanks. I've got two more if that's all right, Rebecca. One of them is about the Frank Kitts car park building that was closed. And I've raised this with you before, Kevin, but you know, my understanding is that we had left the building open even though it was earthquake prone when it was being used for all day parking, because we were only having people entering and exiting once a day, so the risk was a bit lower. And that we closed the parking building because we didn't think it was safe for casual parking, where we would have significantly more people moving through the building. And I guess my question is, rather than leaving it empty, is it an option for us to open it again just for all day parking where we believe that the safety risk is lower?
Look, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question because the question needs to be answered in terms of the building itself. So I'm not sure if Liam's online at the moment. I just can't see.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Jenny. Thanks. Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, you will all know the ongoing assessments we've been doing at Frank Kitts Park, and we, at the end of last year, I approved the drilling of some ground samples, if you like, some bores. And the initial engineering advice we had, and that we briefed councillors on this a while ago, was this concept of really poor ground conditions in the Frank Kitts Park, the earthquake-prone nature of the car park itself, but also this idea that it could laterally spread through the seawalls being undermined, spread into the harbour, and there's a whole lot of issues around that. Which is why we, at that stage, on that advice, shut the car park down in its entirety. The reason why it wasn't being used for the market was, again, for the structural integrity of the building itself. But so what's happened since the core samples have taken is that the engineers have indicated that, look, it's actually not as bad as we thought, but it's still bad. That's the news we got. We haven't actually received the final report yet. And when that is received, Phil Becker's going to package up a position from officers on the car park based on that advice, the detailed advice anyway, and we'll circulate that round to councils. But at this stage, it's still status quo, councillor. But we will be working in the next 2 weeks to get something out to councillors once that final engineering report's been received.
That's great. Thanks, Liam. Look forward to that. Finally, I just wanted to touch on the loss of spaces for Let's Get Wellington Moving and cycle networks, and you talk about Newtown and Thornton to the city. And I guess I just wanted to reflect on that with in Thornton Quay, where we've reduced the number of parking spaces because we've switched from angle to parallel. But we've actually, because we've got fewer spaces now, but we've got higher occupancy. So I would be really interested in knowing what the revenue looks like from that change, because I expect that in other parts of the city, we might see similar things where we reduce the number of spaces, but that just means that people, you know, there's higher occupancy of the spaces that are there or the spaces that are nearby. And we may not see a one-for-one reduction in revenue based on this parking space. It currently earns us $8,000, and when it's gone, we will lose $8,000. That's not actually how it works. Can you shed any light on that, Kevin, and kind of how that $1.5 million was gotten to?
Kevin, you're on mute if you're talking.
Sorry about that. So the 1.5 million is made up of several things. It is the first is the Golden Mile aspect of Let's Get Wellington Moving. So as the car parking in that area starts to be removed, as that work starts to begin, it is also the car parking and parks generally that come out as a result of the two cycleways going in, one from Newtown to the waterfront and one from Karori, or certainly from Glenmore Street down through Rowan Street down to the waterfront. The cost is in the case of Let's Get Wellington Moving, is the cost for the part of the year that will, because our understanding is that work would get underway towards the end of this calendar year, so it reflects that. And the other costs are the full year costs of having those car parks taken away along the route of those two cycleways. So that's that one. In terms of the other question about Thornton Quay, what we do know, I haven't got revenue stats from in front of me, but what I can tell you is that we know that the occupancy of the remaining parks has increased since we moved from angle parks to parallel parking. So there is, so if you like, there is better utilisation coming out of the remaining parks. We're still nowhere near at capacity based on the information that we have from the systems, but it hasn't. But we can see that occupancy has increased on the remaining parks since those parallel parks have come out.
Thanks, Kevin. I'll probably just send an email following up, just asking to dig into some of those figures going forward. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for those questions, Jenny. And Councillor O'Neill.
Good, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sarah. My question was, over the break, the capacity for Wellington City Council to borrow for further investment under the new gearing ratio or cover ratios, and if that has been a bit of a change. I know that there were some changes going on around central government or NZIER.
Kia ora, Terry. No, I'm not quite sure which exactly you're talking about. So the conversations over the break have been around new water entities, and because they're not local government entities, they will be able to be more highly geared than we are. That is true. That's one of the drivers for delivering transformational change across the three waters. No, our LGFA covenants remain the same, and our internal debt to revenue limits as set in our financial strategy remain the same.
Excellent. He pato taku, Chair. My second question is just around the way that we're being walked through some of the changes. If we are able to get options here during the first meeting, or just flagging to be able to see the options of borrowing some more for our capital projects and other things like that, in terms of, not just providing internal savings or cuts to budgets here and there, but what are our options in terms of borrowing going forward?
So there's probably two parts to that question. So one is around the capital program. So could we do more in our capital program? I think what we're experiencing from a on the ground delivery perspective is a high amount of headwinds that are making it really challenging to deliver a capital program that is already 2 to 3 times higher than what we've delivered in the past. So yes, council can resolve lots of things to do with the capital program, but we would be providing insights around the deliverability of that due to market constraints. I think the second part of your question is, can we use debt to offset operational costs inflation, so to provide savings? Is that correct?
Less around current savings. Sorry, my question was mostly around just getting the full picture of rates increases to debt, to how that all works out in the end. Less current spending. Yeah, obviously not breaking the golden rule.
Yeah. So I think what's already included in the base, we can provide you with some transparency around where we are using debt to offset some of those existing costs. For example, we know in the base we've got debt funding COVID revenue reductions, the loss of the airport dividend. We're still doing repayments to that where debt was used for operation costs around the closure of the library. We now have the amount that we debt funded for the WOW grant that we'd used to underwrite WOW. So we can absolutely provide that level of transparency around where we are using debt as a lever to offset the rates requirement. Yeah.
Thank you for those questions, Councillor, and the responses. I put myself next, and I guess it's a sort of a similar question, but I'm wondering particularly around the having to meet the shortfall of the NZTA subsidy for cycleways, and whether any of that, because it's listed as a rates pressure, whether any of that $4 million is able to be transferred to debt funding, given it's a capital project with benefits spread over many years.
Yeah, the majority of that is a debt pressure, Councillor Matthews, and what we're seeing as a rates pressure this year is where the interest costs and depreciation of the cycleways. Sorry, next year is from the stuff we've done this year, where we had assumed a higher level of NZTA funding in the current year, and the impacts of that on next year's OPEX costs. It is that 4 million, I think, was the total debt requirement, but the operating cost is a smaller portion of that will impact next year's rates. We'll make sure that's tidied up for the 8th. You're still on mute.
Oh, Councillor Foon, thank you.
Kia ora team, and thanks for the updates. Mine is coming back to parking, and just with the waterfront parking, have we been able to give or just show any flexibility? And I guess the question is it because the city's occupancy rate aren't meeting the peak, and so the spillover is not happening to the waterfront? Or have we got the measures right? Could we adjust them, i.e. half all day parking temporarily, for example? Or is it that we are not promoting it? Do we need to promote it as an all day, as a short stay parking spot?
I guess partly it is the fact that occupancy across the city is down. Its occupancy dropped obviously like a stone at level 4. It stayed down to level 3. It is starting to come back, but it hasn't come back to where we would normally have expected it. If we look at the Clifton car parking area, that just prior to us moving into the red traffic light, that was starting to get back up close to normal occupancy. It is tracking back down at the moment. We certainly could look to advertise or to market that parking area and to see if that results in any uplift. But it's and have a look and see how that goes. But certainly it is difficult to unpick the performance of that particular parking area relative to everything else that's going on across the city related to COVID.
All right. Thanks, Councillor Foon. Deputy Mayor Free.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm interested in digging in a little bit on that particular one too. So the net result of the waterfront parking changes and the closure of the Frank Kitts car park is a rates pressure, but have they both moved in the same direction? So obviously closing the Frank Kitts car park, you lose revenue. But what happened to revenue with the waterfront parking when we changed from all day to the P240? Did it go up or down?
My understanding is it went down because occupancy wasn't there. So people, and as I said, it coincided with lockdowns and various things. So it's, but certainly occupancy was down, therefore revenue was down. So
if it, would your sense be if we hadn't had COVID that would be revenue neutral, or would we have actually expected a revenue increase from having more short stay parking?
Well, I think if we go back to the reason why we went down this road in the first place, to move it away from full 8-hour day parking or 10-hour day parking through to P240, it was starting to have to build some capacity to be able to offer more short-term parking as the city starts to remove short-term parking from on the street. And so we took the opportunity because at the time that we did, because that was when the opportunity presented itself. We unfortunately, I think, have been caught in the whole COVID thing, but that was the rationale for it, was that we would be able to offer offer additional off-street, if you like, off-street parking as other types of parking start to get shorter in short supply. We certainly able to have a relook at it, but I think we're in a strange situation at the moment, and that we're not in a normal operating environment. So it's a little bit hard to know all of the reasons why there are less people parking there than we might have expected otherwise.
Okay, so it's more COVID than probably than anything else.
Well, it's a little bit difficult to know whether it is anything else. I mean, there are, anecdotally, there are still more people working from home on a given day than there might have been at other times. But look, certainly we could have a look at marketing that car park if we, as a short-term car park, when the time was right to do that, we could certainly do that and see what impact that might not have.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
All right, I don't see any other hands, so we can move on if there's no more questions over that section.
Morning, councillors. The next few slides will take you through the LTP amendment and other possible variances. So if you think back over the last 3 to 6 months, there's been a number of committee resolutions that are relevant to the development of the 22-23 annual plan. And in essence, we've got reports coming to you this week and next week where we will seek committee decisions on how those resolutions should be included in the deliberation. So just in terms of a recap, those things are things like resolutions on Macra Beach, officers to come back on funding options, additional support for earthquake-prone buildings. There was a resolution on Frank Kitts Park that was made in terms of reinstating funding and a plan for the area. There was also a resolution in terms of a destination skate park to come back on costs and a feasibility. There was resolutions on options for Kandala Pool, and then there was also a notice of motion on city housing as well. So those were the 6 committee resolutions that have been made in recent times that are relevant to us to develop the annual plan. So in terms of next steps for those, you'll be receiving reports in the next little bit. In terms of Macra Beach, we'll cover that off on the 8th February annual plan LTP committee. In essence, just in terms of a high-level draft, in terms of what we'll be recommending and noting is that work is progressing in that space, but further work is required to reduce the uncertainty on design and the costs. So underway, but further work to do. In terms of earthquake-prone buildings, additional support, work's being completed on that. And at that same meeting, we'll come back to you with a range of options that relate to fee or rates discounts totaling up to about 700k. So you will see that next week. In terms of just closing out the Frank Kitts Park one, that resolution, while raised, has been superseded by a subsequent meeting of September Planning and Environment, where there was a commitment to demolish the car park was made. In essence, a geotech report is has been commissioned, and in essence, once that's received, an update to councillors will be made, and that's expected to happen in March. The destination skate parks officers are working on that. It's well underway. We won't have it ready for the deliberations, so it's going to go to the April Social, Cultural and Economic Committee, and we expect it, while it's not ready for the draft deliberations, that work will be ready for the final deliberations. We'll go to the next slide, Jeffrey. These first 2, Kandala Pool and Notice of Motion on City Housing, I won't go through them. In essence, you've got the reports on those. And the last one is Better Buildings Initiative. So through Te Atakura program of work, but also through the DC policy work that was done last year. There was reference to coming back with incentives for green buildings in Wellington City. We're working our way through that. And at the moment, we've earmarked to come back to you guys on 8th of March, so at the deliberations. So that's just closing out the committee decisions that have been made over the last 3 to 6 months, and just showing you when we're going to come back to you with those resolutions, so we can feed those into the annual plan process. The next couple of slides are around the LTP. LTP amendment, sorry. So they're around city housing, as you well know. A decision was made last October on that. and final decisions on the consultation material will come to the March deliberations. In essence, options that will be included in the consultation document will be known to you. They were covered off last year, but in essence, it's a decision around the financial sustainability of city housing and whether that's resolved through increasing rates and borrowing or establishing a community housing provider. If we go with option 2, what does that look like? Is it an asset owning fully independent CHIP, a leasehold CHIP with broad responsibilities, or a CHIP with narrow responsibilities? So that is one part of the LTP amendment. The other part relates to residual waste, and I'll actually get Siobhan to talk through those, if that's okay, Siobhan.
Yeah, that's fine. Everyone hear me okay? Thanks, Baz. Kia ora, councillors. You'll remember we've had a few waste papers since October. In October, we presented a paper which looked at some technology options for waste in terms of reducing waste. All of those concluded that there will be some residual waste required. So what we were instructed to do was to embark on a working party process to develop the recommendations on the next stage of the residual waste, really focusing on what those disposal options were. And that we develop a set of principles and evaluation criteria, and working with the working party, we come up with essentially a preferred option. We will be bringing a separate report to you on this next week, and that will also then be, those decisions will be included in the consultation document that you'll consider on 8th March. Next slide, please, Jeffrey. So essentially, we want to publicly consult on 3 possible residual waste disposal options as part of the annual plan consultation. So just really to be clear, this residual waste refers to any waste streams that are left over after the upstream waste minimisation diversion has taken place. And note that we have decoupled the residual waste from the waste minimisation strategic work that we're doing. That will be coming back to you by the Infrastructure Committee in March with initial thoughts, and then final decision in October for that. And that's really driven by the constraints around the time frame for the resource consent application for the landfill. Next slide, please. So the shortlist of options that we proposed are the landfill redevelopment. This is the brownfields option, which we're referring to as the piggyback. Closure of the landfill, and this is really why we need to consult on a potential LTP amendment, because closure is a reasonably practical option. We are required to consult on all of the options available to us. Energy from waste is the other option. You'll remember stage 4, which was the full extension, which was the original idea way back when for extending the resource consent. That's no longer deemed reasonably practicable because we don't have time to do it. We couldn't get it operational by before 2026 when our current consent expires. And it significantly increased complexity and the challenges associated with the consenting relative to the piggyback redevelopment option. So having gone through a multi-criteria assessment, which the working party were included in, we had 2 working party meetings leading up to Christmas, a number of criteria that we used to evaluate these. We concluded the piggyback option can be implemented by 2026. In fact, all of those shortlisted options could be, but it was the preferred option, and also generally supported by the working party participants as well. Next slide. Right, that's me. Back to you, Baz.
Question from Councillor Fitzsimons.
Yeah, look, it is related to the work that was being done, Siobhan, with the Alfredo Bay community coming out of the resolutions, I think might have been November, October, November last year, so I'm just wanting to sort of see how that's going, because I understood some meetings didn't take place, and just request that the council does as much as possible to make sure that those meetings and that engagement is prioritised before we hear any reporting back. So I'm not sure where it's got to, but I did hear just that some meetings were called off, and I just want to make sure that, just send a message that I really want to see those meetings happening and making sure we do go through the agreed process with that community.
Yeah, so they were really good meetings. What became very apparent was that there was far more interested in being involved in the development of the waste management strategy part, waste minimisation management strategic part. And whilst there was engagement on the residual waste options, overall, the working party agreed that they didn't need the third meeting. So it wasn't us that initiated the calling off of that meeting. That was the general feel from the working party, but they did express a strong desire to be involved in the future development of the waste minimisation and management plan. So we've undertaken to continue with them, working with them. We will also need to include other groups, no doubt, through that process. So I think it was actually really, really successful in terms of those meetings and just really starting that engagement. And there is a real commitment from officers to continue that.
Thank you. You've got any more questions, Councillor Fitzsimons? No? Okay. Any other questions on that section of the presentation? Well, we're warming up for the year. So we'll go back to Jeffrey, I think, for the last section.
Thank you. So this is just basically next steps now. So just to touch briefly on consultation. So on the 8th of March, you will receive a full consultation document for the amendments and also any requirements of the annual plan. And I guess it's just to note, we're pulling together the plan for that. So a plan for the consultation, how we will engage with communities will be part of that, including in particular, obviously, city housing and particular groups interested in that and residual waste. We are very conscious that it will be over a period where Omicron is still out and about in the community, and so we're planning now for the effects of that and likely a heavier reliance on online engagement methods for our consultation. We'll work that through, and we're using lessons from previous consultations where we've been doing this, particularly around our annual plan back in 2020 during lockdown, and we'll leverage some of those same methods we used previously to get as the right engagement as high as we can with the community. And then finally, just next steps, obviously, so the 8th of February meeting, which is next week, you'll be debating and deciding the matters that we outlined today. So some of those, as Baz mentioned, the resolutions that are coming back, seeking decisions on those. And you're getting that clear direction from you all around what are the final choices you want for that the deliberations themselves on the 8th of March. The papers for that should be out with you all by close of play tomorrow at the latest. And then the 8th of March meeting is like I say, the full deliberations. You have a draft consultation document on the LTP amendments and the relevant amendments to the LTP alongside that, and the draft annual plan and full and budget. And that is all.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And I guess I wanted to talk about amendments from councillors and to really ask that we all agreed to a process that we wanted a priority to be that we reduced last minute amendments. So what I would really like councillors to do is to put your minds to any amendments, and I'm not necessarily encouraging them, but that we get them in the next couple of weeks so we can have them prior to that 8th of March meeting. Because we've got a shortened timeline, it would be really, really helpful. It's what we said we wanted, and I think with the work that we've got this year, it would be really, really helpful to flush those amendments out very soon. So I'll be following that up with you and suggest we probably put it as a sort of a standing item, on the Mayor and Councillor only time for our next couple of meetings to really make sure we have a thorough discussion about amendments and know what's coming. Hello, the Mayor. You got a question or a comment?
I could probably manage one of both. So thank you. No, look, my apologies for not being there earlier. Just in terms of comment is, if there are any suggestions, I mean, we've already had a conversation about the prospective rates rise and the desire not to go higher. So if you could bear that in mind, that'd be very much appreciated. And also the ability for the organisation to deliver, which is going to be particularly in the capital area. It's going to be very stretched, I would imagine, but I'm sure they will give us that advice. My question is Jeff, in terms of the engagement, specifically what thought you've given to engaging with our housing tenants around the chip. If there's some particular thoughts you've got on that, I would appreciate hearing from you.
Probably our communications team would know more about that. They've been planning in more detail around the engagement with tenants, but I know that's top of mind, and I think something that we'll have to manage as we have an online-based engagement, and how that face-to-face, which is I think we know is important with our tenants, can still be achieved. So we'll be balancing that. I don't have specifics. Sorry, Mayor. I don't know if anyone else is online.
That was why I was asked. That was why I was asking the question. I was conscious of that. Specific challenge.
Mayor Foster, I would just add that we'll make sure that the council is well briefed on the process and how we are engaging with our tenants, but I am very confident that we are planning to do that as well as we can.
Lloyd here. Can I just chip in here as well? Obviously, the COVID environment is going to impact just how we tactically run the consultation. Obviously, our preference is to maximise face-to-face where possible. However, during the last lockdown, we did do some limited face-to-face, and we'll be learning from those experiences we did in the last lockdown, the last annual plan. If you recall, we had to curtail our face-to-face as well, but we still managed to reach out to people. So yes, the whole design of the consultation program will look to see where we can maximise those opportunities, but do so safely.
Thank you. I just also want to note Councillor Wolf's question in the chat, and could we all be sent the slides? That would be wonderful. And I've got a hand up from Councillor Calvert. Hope you're not feeling any dental pain, Councillor.
Not at the moment. Thank you. Drugs are still there. Look, just a question. Given we've got the 6 monthly results coming out till mid-March, how does that impact on the information that we've got to determine our draft annual plan?
Are you talking about capital delivery, Councillor? Can you be more specific?
Capital delivery, but also sort of how we're achieving some of our operating expenses and revenue. So I'm just thinking that we've got a 6 monthly report, which is not due to come to us till middle of March.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Calvert. The biggest impact that you'll see from this year into next year will be in relation to the capital program and what we managed to deliver this fiscal, and what the impact of carry forwards might be on next year's program. We are keeping abreast of actuals and performance, and those are informing the cost pressures that you might be seeing now and the advice that you're getting now. I suppose the only unknown will be the impacts of COVID, and yes, all we know there is that we know if we forecast it, we will get it wrong. So we will make sure we keep through those regular channels our actual performance this year in front of you, but they have been taken into account as much as possible through this development of the budget.
So given that within the first 3 months we had to rephase $80 million of our CapEx budget, are you envisaging anything similar on the second 3 months of the quarter? I mean, for the second quarter?
So from an operating perspective, we were on budget as at the end of December. And for CapEx, so for CapEx for December, we delivered to budget for December. There is an underspend year to date. As you know, we do see an uplift over the second half of the year. How that actually materialises is quite difficult to say in the current environment, given the challenges and potential labour shortages if Omicron does break out. So it's really challenging to try and forecast. Whatever I say now will be wrong, so I'll stick to actuals. December delivered to budget. Year to date, we are behind.
Okay, so we'll have some of that information prior to the 8th of March.
I'll have to check with the team on that around timing.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Deputy Mayor Free.
And I know it's a bit late in the piece to be raising this, but I just wondered too, how much thinking's been done about some of our earthquake-prone buildings and the risks that might pose to our budget? Like, you know, just thinking, for example, Freiburg Pool. So the question is, how much contingency planning have we done around some of those things?
I'll start just from a overall debt perspective. As you know, Deputy Mayor, one of the reasons we have a policy of a debt to revenue ratio well below that of the LGFA covenant is so we've got the headroom to respond to some of those shocks, and we specifically called out resilience and impacts of earthquakes as something that we would use that headroom for. So I feel confident that if we have more nasty surprises, yes, we absolutely have the ability to fund it. It's just when we get to doing it would be the question that the organisation would need to respond to. Siobhan, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah. So I won't talk for Freiburg, but for the ones that are in the property portfolio, such as Opera House, Michael Fowler, etc. So we put that DSA in the OPEX, that DSA cost, and dependent on what they come back with will obviously influence what level of work, if any, we need to do on those buildings. So it's really difficult to do that contingency planning until we have a handle on what those DSAs come out with. And as Sarah said, you know, we will then, you know, once we get those DSAs, then it's about doing that planning, and whether it's funding that work additional to what everything else we've got on our capital program or going through a prioritization exercise. But, you know, that work, until we have a handle on what the condition of those buildings are and have a plan of options to remediate if required, you know, there's probably little value in doing a lot of that planning at this point in time. But suffice to say, there is a potential risk there.
And I guess the other question is, if we're doing some LTP adjustments, how does that factor in Let's Get Willie Moving?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my right buttons. Hi, I'm brought up a concerning screen. Let's Get Wellington Moving. We are hoping the timing is going to be perfect. So once we know what the existing LTP includes the costs required to move into the detailed business case stage, but also fully funding the City Streets program, as you guys are aware, we're hoping that it will align nicely, that the outcome of the detailed business case phase enables us to fully fund that through the next long-term plan, or identify all of the funding stream requires into the next LTP. We don't know it enough now to do it in this LTP amendment. I'm really hoping it's going to work perfectly into the next long-term plan.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
Okay, is there Councillor Covert, you've still got your hand up, but have you asked your questions?
Yes, I have. Sorry, I'll get that down.
No, all good. All right. Well, I don't see any new hands, so I think that brings us to the end of the session and continues our brilliant record of going under time for these. So to give you a slightly longer break before our workshop this afternoon. So I just want to thank officers for all of the work that's gone into getting us to this point, and look forward to reading the papers and having a substantive discussion next week. See you all soon.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.